folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Utah County Republican Party podcast. I am here with Tina Cannon. She is running for State Auditor. Now, before y'all go to sleep, the State Auditor does a whole bunch of stuff that you probably don't expect. So stay tuned because we're going to ask her about all this stuff. But for right now, Tina, if people want to know about you and why you're running and, okay, hey, why should I vote for Tina? What's the answer to that question?
Go to tinacannon.com to learn more. But basically, I'm the current Deputy State Auditor in the office. I know what we do. I know why we do it. I know how we do it. I know who does it. But I also know the importance of what we do. I have the experience of having worked in a county that was the victim of an embezzlement by a county administrator. So I've seen the impacts to a community when basic financial controls are not in place and how devastating that can be. So the experience that I bring is unique and different. My background is tax specialization, fortunately. Everything we audit in the state of Utah is tax revenue. So we audit government, not individuals. So we are the taxpayer's first line of defense against an out-of-control government.
Wow. It's so sad that we need a line of defense against an out-of-control government, but yeah,
it is.
They all seem to do it. The city does it, the state does it, the federal does it.
Yeah. So the first assignment I got coming into the office was on property tax. I know no one's experienced this out-of-control rising of your property tax.
Oh, no, not here.
Yeah. And the question over whether it was being done equitable and fair. And that's where the expertise of knowing how property tax works, it works differently than income tax. It's not always intuitive, but that understanding of who's responsible for that, how you make sure that those are equitable and fair distribution of a property tax. All of those questions on how tax is applied at the micro level that then rolls up to the macro level. So you can't have a tax commission that says, hey, our revenue was the same regardless of how we applied the law. It's who they get the tax from where it matters. So
yeah, that makes sense. And I think a lot of people, you mentioned property tax, and our property tax went up, but it wasn't the county. It was the school district.
You'll actually see that it was the state. The freezing of the rate at the state level impacted the whole state. And when property tax, it is a percentage, but it's number based. And the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, said that for a county or a city to raise property tax, you have to do truth in taxation. But they exempted the state legislature from having that requirement.
Oh, God.
So when the state legislature says, we're going to freeze your rate for 5 years while property values are increasing exponentially, their amount of money they collected was skyrocketing while it was kept it was kept stable at a local level. But then you also saw on top of that, you did see some school districts raising rates, and you did see some counties and cities raising rates. But when you bring all of those together and see that freezing of the rate at the state level, that was the biggest impact that people were feeling.
Gotcha.
Understanding that and making sure there's been a shift. Sorry, I'm going to go deep.
No, you're good.
Nerd. There's been a shift over the last, I would say, 15, 20 years from commercial property to residential property, as the state has really struggled on how you reevaluate the value of a commercial property. And they have not had that problem with residential sales, because residential sales are public information and it goes out on the MLS or the multi-listing services. So the counties and the assessors have been able to keep up on changing and increasing the values of residential property. They have not been as good at keeping up on the commercial properties, and especially on the centrally assessed. Centrally assessed means that it goes across county lines and is assessed by the state. When those values are not rising the way residential property is rising, you'll see a tax burden shift from commercial or business property to residential property. And you're starting to see that across the state. Not starting.
Yeah.
We're really into that at this point, and you're starting to see those percentages. When you see those percentages, what used to be a 29 to 33% of a county tax was centrally assessed, and now it's shrinking to 14, 13, 12% of the total. That's where you're seeing that shift happen.
Well, that just makes me more unhappy with more people.
Yeah, there you go. We get into all of these nerdy here in the office, but that is why where Utah taxes property tax, sales tax, and income tax, there are a lot of areas where compliance with statute and ensuring that a fair and equitable system is done across the full system,
Right.
how important that is in understanding those statutes on tax. So we do
Yep.
a lot of work. For those who haven't had an opportunity or don't know about Transparent Utah, this is the auditor's website. So transparent.utah.gov will give you a host of tools and analytics on state, county, city, school districts. All of your government information is out there, and you can start pulling the data behind the numbers so you can start knowing what we know and holding your government responsible. We give you that information as we gather and collect it and put it in a searchable tool that all taxpayers can have and use. And you can use it to decide whether or not they're doing it right, doing it not right, and you can know what we know. So,
Yeah, one thing I've looked at transparent.utah.gov, and it covers a whole lot more than just numbers and money,
yes.
which, as we get into it, people look at the state auditor and they think, oh, it's a state CPA, kind of like the attorney general's a state's attorney. Not entirely. There's a lot more that you
That's
guys do.
37% of our office are CPAs and are on the financial
Uh-huh.
audit side. But as my opponent would like to point out, that you just have to be a CPA. No, you don't. You need to be able to work with CPAs. John Dougal is an engineer. He had a great
Uh-huh.
vision for how we need to be holding government accountable on the statutory side. That's where Transparent Utah came from, in being able to know more than just the dollars. You also need to know what the performance, are you complying with what the intent of the law was? And that comes
Right.
through the statutory compliance and the performance management. Are you effective and efficient? So many of the responses back on our audits are, well, you need to tell the legislature that we need more money. That's not the answer. It is usually an allocation of resources to new and differing technologies that make you more efficient in the way you do your job. That's across the board, and government is no exception to that. We see innovation in the private sector. We should be seeing innovation in the government sector as well. So our office is really divided into the financial audit side, the local government side, and then the data analytics side. And now we also have the state privacy officer is also in the state auditor's office. And that's an important distinction because the independence of the office is crucial. We say the hard things. So we need to be independent of the government levels where those decisions are being made, so that when we give pushback over how things are done, you know that you can trust the opinion, because we are not influenced by the local or the state government, because we are independently elected, and so we can give that independent assessment. That is especially true in privacy. And there was a real discussion over where the state privacy officer should go. And it makes perfect sense for it to be in the state auditor's office, because you want someone who's not collecting the data to be able to give the assessment over whether you're collecting too much data, you're not protecting the data, or you're oversharing the data. So that should be an independent voice that's not influenced by, oh, but if we just had a little more information here, or if
Right.
if we were just able to capitalize on it and sell the data, then we can offset some of our other costs. That needs to be someone free of those influences. So the state privacy officer is also part of our office, an important part. See, you get me so excited about it. I just keep going. People don't really understand the extent of what we do, and it's so important. Like I said at the beginning, having been in a community that had an embezzlement, the impact, it has taken 15 years to bring the trust level back to even be able to hire another county manager. That was the impact on the community. And that's not always the most effective, efficient way to run without someone in charge. So,
right.
Anyway.
So let's kind of step back for a minute. Data privacy is kind of a big thing for me, but I think you've covered that, and I could get into the nerd weeds on this, right? I'm a software developer, and I get into, it's like, oh yeah, I got to protect that. I got to be right. Anyway, But you said there were kind of three areas. One was kind of the financial audit. You talked about local government. So what do you do with local government? Right. I'm not going to complain about the city council. I'll save that for another show.
All right.
But what do you do for local government?
So we are also over their financial and statutory compliance as well. So we do a lot of training on new statutes or how, as elected officials change, we train them in what they are responsible for. In county and city government, most people don't realize that it is your council and your commissions that are ultimately responsible for your financial statements. They don't understand that. They always want to say, oh, that's the accountant, that's the auditor's statements. No, those are the responsibility of the governing body, and they need to take responsibility for implementing and then the results of those financial controls and those financial reports. So we do a lot of training first, and then we review their financial statements, their budgets, then their financial statements. And then we are also over there making sure that they are audited financial statements. And the extent of the audit depends on the amount of the money that they bring in. So the more money you bring in, the more complex your audit needs to be. We've gone through fees has been a big one under John Dougall. And we've been reviewing fees at every level of government, because it's easy for a government to say, oh, we don't want to raise taxes, so we're just going to raise fees instead. And then there's fee creep, where they start using the fee for things that the fee is not designed to pay for. And you start pushing the full cost of government off on people who it shouldn't be pushed off onto. So we've done a lot of review in local government and even up to the college level on fees. We did one of the courts, currently doing one at the bar. So we do a lot of review on local government and how it functions. Train, make sure they're in compliance.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I was on a charter school board for like 12 years, and we went to the auditor's website to get trained on all kinds of things, right? It wasn't just the financial, oh, here's how you look at your budget, and here's how, right? Because we were responsible, like you said, for the financial operation of the school. Now, we delegated a lot of the work to the director of the school, right? But they had to report back to us, and we had to make sure that everything was, looking right. And we typically had somebody with some kind of financial training that was on the board, and so that helped. But the auditor's website training is awesome. Yeah. It is awesome. And it covered other things too, right? So this is where I'm trying to get people the idea, hey, look, it's not just money, right? Because your website trained us on open meetings, right? Yep. You have to let people in, you have to let them comment, you have to blah, 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 right? You have to notice so many days in advance, or all that stuff, right? And so when you're talking about statutory audits and statutory regulations that you're auditing people on, this is what you're talking about, right? Is, hey, we have these laws, we have these rules, and you have to be following them.
Right. And so the latest controversy, you're exactly right. We train on all of those aspects as well. Open public meetings. Our latest one has been what is called the transgender bathroom bill, the compliance for that. And now let's go back and remind everyone, we audit government. We don't audit people. And so there has been some confusion with that. And that's been part of the pushback and the hoopla over the transgender bathroom bill, and why our office and our reporting line was pretty much attacked and spammed. And they tried.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. They tried to bring it down. It was a concerted effort to bring it down. The law went active on May 1st. And on May 1st, there was a very popular author with a very huge Twitter following, who put out the link to the website and encouraged all of his followers to bring it down. And so it was a concerted attempt to crash our site. So we've exponentially improved. We found it's been a learning experience across the board. Don't want to, but we've survived it. We have. And now, instead of having 14,000, we're down to the 5 that were legitimate complaints. So out of the 14,000 that were sent in, we have 5 that we'll review on those local governments. So that one, where the runway was so short, there wasn't a lot of training on local governments on how to implement the law and the changes. But So that's not a good example of it. But on
Right.
privacy, where the law is starting to ramp up, as you're seeing, as privacy becomes more and more of a concern, we've started with let's train local governments on where their weaknesses are, how to self-assess, how to find the resources to improve their security, and then to know what data they do need and what data
Mhm.
they don't need. There's a lot of over collection out there, and anytime you have data that's vulnerable, you want to make sure you're minimizing the amount of data you collect.
Right.
So we do a lot of training, and then once we know that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing and they don't have any excuses not to know, because not everyone is as good as you who does their training as they're supposed to.
We built it into our process, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's not as much as other organizations either.
Yeah. So
So,
and then we hold them accountable. Once we train you how to do it, we hold you accountable. You do have to follow the rules.
right. So, kind of walk me through this process a little bit. So, you mentioned the transgender bathroom bill, right? Which is kind of a hot button issue.
Mhm.
But so the legislature passes a law, right? Or a bill that says, hey, boys, you can't go in girls' bathrooms, girls, you can't go in boys' bathrooms. Right. So where does the auditor's office pick things up, and what do you do? Like what's the process as far as like, you know, letting people know what they have to do, and and then yeah, the reporting and all of it. Like, what do you do?
All right. So first, we have to say that everyone in the auditor's office cares deeply about safety in the bathroom.
Right.
And I was a victim of this in college, so I know exactly what the situations can be. First and foremost, if you feel unsafe in a bathroom or a locker room, you need to call 911. There are laws
Mhm.
against voyeurism. There are laws against indecent exposure. That's your first step. And the second step is to report it to the government agency whose bathroom it is or locker room it is. So if you're in a school district or if you're in a city's um, municipal or wherever you're at, you report to that agency. If through that process you don't feel like the state agency or government agency whose facility it is did not handle it properly, then it's a report to us. And then we do the
Okay.
investigation over what is their policy? Are they training their employees on it? Did they implement the policy? Does it comply with the state statute? And then we report back. And then what is built into that law is that we bill that agency for our investigation. So when the talk
Mm.
over was there money allocated to the bill, the money was allocated that we would bill directly to the agency. And then there's also pushback in there if an individual over reports and it starts to be a harassment, then it goes to the AG, and
Right.
you can actually find an individual who over reports or who gives a false report. So our responsibility really comes down to the agency and are they implementing the policy the way the state requires them to implement. So that's where we come in. And I think the
Okay.
confusion is that you would call and report an individual activity to us first, and that's not the way it should go. Um,
Well, that's fine, because if it's at the city office, or if I'm in a state owned building, somewhere, yeah, I'd much rather call the people that manage that building. I mean, because I can probably go find them.
yeah. hmm Yeah, we don't want you to call us. We'll take a while to get there because, well, we're
Yeah.
not there. And and we're just not designed to do that. That is first law enforcement and second the agency where it's at. And then we step in. And that's where originally, so the state auditor was assigned this part of the role. It went back and forth as it went through the committee. And the auditor
Right.
was not added in to this process until I want to say the second, maybe the third substitute. So we were in the last
Mhm.
48 hours, and there was not a lot of negotiation with the office or with the auditor over
Mhm.
what that role would be or how we would do it. And that being the focus of a very controversial, for whatever reason, piece of legislation, and being it's been a learning curve for us, and
I'm sure.
really a bad one. These are lessons that probably we were going to learn eventually anyway, and we've had to strengthen our resources. We did burn through our allocation of state funding for this legislation in the first 4 hours.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, it, and then we have to find a way to pay that for that another way. So that's been part of the pushback and the angst. And then our employees have had an expansion of their vocabulary that is not always ideal. So, but we've gotten really good at AI, the talk in the office of how you sort through. It's been really interesting over the search capabilities that we have now in how you can narrow it down and the words that we were looking for, and then not to open any attachments.
Right.
So it's been a learning curve. I shouldn't giggle because the secretary who takes the phone calls when they decided to call, those are not always kind, and they are not always respectful, and that's unfortunate because she didn't have anything to do with the legislation or the implementation or the oversight, but she has taken a lot of the heat.
So one thing that I guess I'm wondering about is, so let's say that the legislature is considering a bill, whether or not it involves adding responsibility to the auditor's office. What role do you all play there? Like, do you get involved and say, hey, this is going to add so much regulation or so much overhead or so much this or that? Or do you wait until it passes and then do stuff then?
Both. We wish that there was more collaboration. So I was brought on originally as the policy advisor to work with legislators over this. And in some cases with legislators, it's very individual. They're aware of where the weaknesses are, and they will talk to you, and they want to make sure that the guardrails are on. But that doesn't always happen. And so then it's what do we do to fix it later? So let's give an example. So Inland Port has been a source of a lot of audits and a lot of angst for us. And they've had to restructure at least 3 times but this happens because anytime you exempt an agency from following state procurement code, you're going to have a problem. So as we push back on the legislative changes over how Inland Port will be structured, we've tried to make sure that we're strengthening 2 types of code, the code particularly for Inland Port, but also state procurement code and the recommendations for every agency following them to make sure that you're not able to push a lucrative contract off to a friend or a business partner or a family member. Those are the things that cause the distrust in government and cause the angst and get people in trouble. MLB, we exempted them from procurement code one more time. So we assume that we're going to see the very same problems again. We wish that the legislature would listen, be a little more proactive in getting the guardrails there. So we do it in both ways. So I'm always appreciative. I know that Dan McKay has been great in watching the Rev and Tax Committee as they've discussed property tax and how these changes can be made. The legislative auditors did another audit. They took 6 times as many people and 4 times as long to come up with the same conclusion that I came up with, but I appreciate the backup. But I know that they're very active in what do we do to fix the problem, and that making sure that they understand that this is a data analytics problem, and you cannot solve data analytics with requiring more assessments, that you actually have to be able to apply what's learned in an assessment across a category of properties. And how do you do that in a mass amount of properties? You have to be able to apply that statewide and then be able to compare market across. So those are the fixes that get very, very technical in understanding. The first role of an audit when we go in and look at these things is to become an expert in how things are done and how they should be done, how they're actually done, how they should be done, and what you need to do to get to perfect and make those recommendations. Well, we can then take those results in our audits and then push for legislation that closes the gaps for where the loopholes are, so that we have good policy in addition to good legislation, so that it's applied the way the legislature intended. And we still have the financial safeguards and the statutory safeguards to make sure we're doing the best things. This is taxpayer money. We want to make sure that we're using it for exactly what we said we were using it for, as efficiently as we possibly can, or we're giving it back. So
Yeah,
That's the role.
that makes sense. That makes sense. So, I guess the next piece of this, because I'm just curious, okay, so beforehand, yeah, you're talking to legislatures, hopefully, they're coming
Mhm.
to you and saying, hey, how does this impact, where does this go? So let's say they pass the bill, right?
Mhm.
And so some of the bills, it sounds like, are more along the lines of, hey, we're going to spend money on this program, or we're going to do this thing, right? And so you get involved at that point. What does that look like?
So we don't set policy, so we're
Right.
reviewing what the policy actually is, and there have been several times where
Okay.
we
Wait,
will.
wait, 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 wait. Hold on. So you said we don't set policy. So
Right.
they pass a bill, and usually there's somebody that says, what this means is that you have to do these things. You can't do those things. I mean, some of them are pretty clear, like the open public meeting law.
Mhm.
It's pretty clear. The timelines are in there. What you have to do is in there. But sometimes it feels like somebody else is going in and saying, these are the rules for who does that.
So the legislature still does set the full policy, but
Okay.
they, especially in open public meetings, there is an open public meeting commission that will give feedback on it and push back.
Okay.
And we do the same thing over, even in an audit, when we say, well, you've got this loophole, this may not be what you intended, but that fits in the law. They
Okay.
can do that. It's not a good idea, and we don't recommend it. And here's where you're off the reservation on what's being done, but it's not against code. So
Okay.
that's
So
where
you
those,
help them interpret what
yeah,
may happen with what they've got.
yeah, and that's happening right now in one in particular, in a county government situation where we're looking at it going, this is a restricted fund. These are the uses. Um, you didn't say they couldn't use it for that, so they can. Um, Not really the intent, but it's not.
Mhm.
But anytime that you say this, you open the door and you're allowing them to do it. That's not what you wanted, but if you don't want them to do that, then you need to be more clear in restricting it. So we do have that role as well. Sometimes the legislature doesn't always agree, but there's an interpretation in all code, and that's where it gets really, really complicated. And that's not what I intended. Well, that is what it allows, and so and
Back to that statutory compliance, right? This
right,
is what it says.
right.
So,
So and on that statutory part, let's just clarify. So we have subpoena power on every financial transaction in the state and any level of government on a financial transaction, and the statutory becomes second. So, for example, on an audit that we did in Cache County on the Cache County attorney, once that investigation reaches the level of criminal charges, we turn over to the AG. We'll do the investigation and we will point out the problems and the violations. But once it goes to a charge, it goes to the AG's office. So there is some coordination there on where our role ends, as well on statute. So while we can point it out, whether or not where it goes on the criminal side is not up to our office. At that point, it is up to the AG. So that's where the interpretation of statute and then the enforcement of statute are different. So if that makes
so back to the other question I was asking then. So if they pass a law and
Mhm.
it says, hey, this program is going to go into place, right? Well, where do you pick up?
So typically it's got some time to implement, and then we have a hotline. So if you're asking over when we get involved on deciding on the statute, so
Mhm.
we do financial reviews every year on every entity. And sometimes issues will come out in the findings on those financial letters. But we also have a 3-person team that is our waste, fraud, and abuse hotline. So if there is a concern over this is what the law is, but this is not what's happening, the reports can come through that hotline, and that's where our investigation will pick up over looking deeper into how is this actually being done. And it's not always there's a problem. Sometimes it's an explanation back to the complainant over, well, this is what the code is and this is what they're allowed to do, and technically they're falling within that. It doesn't always go against the entity as much as it is an investigation over what's going on, what should be going on, and then our ruling sounds so tough, but our assessment of over what's going on. So yeah.
Yeah.
Does that
So
does that make sense? So
yeah, I think it does.
So there are several ways where we come in. If we're catching it in a regular audit over, like our single audit every year, usually it's sitting right here, but it's not. But that's on all of the federal money that comes through. There are findings in those. So in an audit letter, we'll have a findings section over these are the problems that we're seeing. This is where you have weaknesses in your system, and this is what we recommend you do. Every audit letter will have those unless it is a clean bill of health and you did everything right. But typically there's a finding section where you can see where the weaknesses are. Sometimes our investigations where there's a deeper problem come from those. And sometimes they come from the hotline where someone's calling in and asking us to look.
All right. So I feel like for the last half hour, I've talked to you about what the auditor's office does.
Mhm.
And you've answered the question. I mean, you obviously know what you're talking about, right? You've got the experience, you've been there, right? It's like, hey, this is how this works. Let's talk about you and what you're going to do as the auditor, right? I mean, you're running for office. There's got to be a reason, right? It sounds, you kind of gave us the short answer at the beginning of the show, but what would you keep doing? What would you do different? Why do you care? I mean, these are the kinds of things that it's like, okay, here's the real meat.
Right. So I actually had sold my business. My background is I was part of 2 CPA firms, an owner in the second one, and started the first one, owner in the second one. And I had sold my company and was looking to retire when John reached out and offered me a position in the office. But John had got to know me when I was a county commissioner in Morgan County. And as I pointed out, I came on after an embezzlement of 100% of the general fund by the county manager. And he got it in 15 months. And it was devastating. And I came on with an accounting background and read the audit letters and went, oh, yay. Because none of the changes had been implemented, which tells you there's a huge weakness in the system and knowing. Right. So I got to know John really, really well. And so when I sold my company and John found out that I was looking for something to do, which I thought would go to a beach or go on a lot of hikes, he reached out.
I am so in on the beach.
And he said, no, you can make a difference. Come make a difference. So that's what we do every day is we make a difference. Apparently, this is how I give back, that I've been blessed to live here. And having known county government and local government and being involved as long as I have, it's really hard for me not to care. So I'm passionate about honest, ethical government because I've seen the impacts of not having it. And we deserve to have a government we trust. But that comes with trust and verify. It's an important part of government. That oversight is crucial. So having been involved in other government, we joke that the mothership called me home because it's kind of nerdy that I enjoy this so much, but I'm passionate about it. There are local governments that do fantastic job, and we highlight that in Transparent Utah as well. You can find those too. But when there's a problem, it's important that someone in local government, like I was, who's pushing back over these changes need to happen, that someone has their back. And I'm doing that right now for 2 other communities that are going through what I went through. And I know how vitally important that is to not feel like you're alone in pushing back for good control and proper use. And I have said in public meetings, generally accepted accounting principle is generally accepted for a reason. It's not partisan here. Right. We do this right because it's not our money. And that is an important thing to remember. The other thing is I spent 28 years preparing people's taxes. And I absolutely know that people will send more to the state of Utah than they will send to the federal government. And while the state auditor is not as sexy a race as Senate or governor, our oversight is crucial in making sure that that money is used the way we told them it would be used, or we give it back. And I know who we took it from. I've spent 28 years knowing exactly who we took it from. And I'm passionate about that we should leave it in the families and the businesses that earned it, or we should use it very carefully and wisely.
So, I mean, I'm totally on board with what you're saying. A lot of it seems kind of high level, like you're talking at the principal level, right? Which is important to me, right? Because how do I put it? I've explained this to other people before, right? Where you talk to a Senate candidate or an AG candidate or an auditor candidate, right? And you're like, hey, look, what are you going to do? Right. But
Mhm.
the problem is like you have a COVID come along or some other thing come along. And it's like, you know what? When they were running, I didn't know I needed to ask them about pandemics.
Right,
Right.
right,
Nobody did. And so the reality is okay, so what are the principles, right? What do you operate on? What's your operating system in your head that says I'm going to do this job in a certain way so that when the bizarre thing comes along that nobody foresaw, then I know, well, I feel pretty good that Tina's going to do the thing that I want her to because she operates under the same principles that I live under. Does that make
right.
sense?
It does. It does. And so what I have learned is the most important quality in a state auditor is a backbone. That's what I've learned from being here, because ultimately it is up to the state auditor how tough you are. When John Dougal was elected, fully a third, actually probably more than a third of state agencies were non-compliant in their financial reporting. That's
Oh God.
how embezzlement happens. That's why
Yeah.
Morgan County was allowed to happen. When nobody's watching, you're free to do whatever you want to do and you get away with it. When John was elected as not a CPA, but with someone who cared and was incredibly frugal and cared how the money was used, he came in and said, all right, local government, if you expect us to distribute your state sales tax, you'll be
Mhm.
compliant in your financial reporting. You know how many are compliant today? 100%, because they want to get their allocation of funding. So you
Yep.
have to have someone who knows both the carrot, here, come along, we'll train you, we'll show
Mhm.
you how to do it, but also the backbone to say, and there is a consequence if you are non-compliant, and there is a consequence for flouting the law, and that is,
Right.
we say the tough thing in the auditor's office. That's why we're independent. We have to be able to say to the state tax commission, no, we will not tell the legislature you need more money. We will tell them that you need to allocate your resources differently than what you're doing. And they don't like to
Makes
hear
sense.
that. You need someone who is willing to say the hard thing. And one of the pushbacks that I've got is, um, well, some people don't like you. Yeah, that's because sometimes you have to say the hard thing, and people don't like you when they say the hard thing. If you have an auditor that everyone likes, you have a problem. It's
Mhm.
also the reason why I said from the beginning, I've been in county government. I have a lot of friends in county government. I did not ask for a donation or an endorsement from anyone in county government because we audit them. And I've
Right.
been on this side when we've had to say the tough thing. And I don't want any endorsement or donation to ever be a cloud over a ruling that we make out of the office over, this is the law, this is what you've done, and this is what you should have done. There should never be even a hint of question over whether or not something that I did as a candidate will impact what I do as the state auditor. It's that independence is crucial.
Right. So I guess we kind of talked about things at a high level. You could just I think you've pretty well answered the next question that I had, and then I kind of want to get into specifics, like what are you going to implement, what are you going to weed out, what are you right. But before we do that, because you've kind of alluded to this several times that the auditor has to be independent, have a backbone.
Mhm.
There is rumor that a bill is going to be put forward that is going to pull the AG, the auditor, the treasurer under the governor, right? And they'll be appointed.
Yeah, not a rumor. Bill HB 547, it was sponsored by Brady Bremer. It was right in the legislation. So it's not a rumor, it was there. And then the last week of the session, our office was actually, our physical office in the Capitol was then allocated away from the auditor and given to the state Senate. And we spent 5 days pushing back over that. It's very real. There are other ways. In fact, I was at the Association of State Auditors meetings last week, and this is a problem across the United States with state auditors. There is always pushback over, yeah, well, you pointed out that we did this, so now we're going to take this on. There
Right.
is always that pushback, and there is always the desire for it to remove the independence, that they don't want you to look.
Mhm.
And there's pushback when you say the tough thing, because people don't like to be embarrassed or look bad or have mistakes pointed out, because then
Yeah.
the general citizenry can hold you responsible. That independence is what allows us to say the tough thing. I would go further in saying that our budget probably should be tied to the state budget as a percentage, whether we use it or give it back, which I know under John Frugal Dougal, we would have given it back. But it shouldn't be tied to the legislature. Oh, well, you shouldn't have said that about this, so therefore we're going to do this. We
Mhm.
need to be able, when you see the conflict going on right now over the implementation of the transgender bathroom bill, that makes people in the office nervous. Well, they'll push back. They will take our funding and we won't be able to pay our employees. That is a real concern. And that independence is why I point that out, is you have to be able to say what needs to be said without worrying about whether or not you get fired for it or you're no longer in your position. And putting the chief auditor under the governor, when they are responsible for auditing how the governor implements policy and all state agencies, is a
Mhm.
dangerous thing. The best way for me to point this out is Enron and WorldCom. That's what happened there. When an auditor is not truly independent or is dependent on their funding coming from the source that they're criticizing, there is always the worry about the independence. It should remain an independent office, and it probably should be more independent in its funding.
Right.
So then there was a
I
second
love
part
it.
of the question. Remind me.
Yeah. So the last part, and we're kind of getting short on time, so I'm just giving you a heads up. But
Yeah.
anyway, what are you going to implement? What are you going to roll back? What are you going to do as the auditor?
So follow up on audits is crucial. We're going to start following up on we've had a myriad of really impactful audits. We need to make sure that we're following up on, did they implement the change? So that's the first one. Second one, we're doubling down on Transparent Utah. We are going to continue. This is the future of information. So we need to make it more clear and the tools more user friendly. We also need to incorporate local government doesn't always like how it's out there. We need to be able to report when there have been changes to the data that's reported out there, but also format it in a way that is more conducive to how local government wants it, not presented as much as organized so that everyone understands it the same way. So when you pull a report, it's the same report your local government official is looking at, so they know where you're at. So there's some tweaking on that I would do. But I also, the same way that you can sign up for legislation and follow legislation during the legislative session, I'd like you to be able to sign up for audits. So if you have a concern about your school district and want to get an alert every time their audit is reported, so you can look at their findings, I want you to be able to do that, because we do a lot of really good work and you should read it. It's awesome. So I want people to be more aware of what we do. As I've traveled the state campaigning for state auditor, I get that question over and over again. People think that we're auditing them and not government. They don't understand that process and how we are your watchdog and how we hold government accountable, how we keep them transparent. It's part of that challenge in getting that word out there. But also, for my third one, that is really, really important to me, the accounting industry is being impacted by, we're losing practitioners as they retire, and we're not getting as many students into the profession, and that is impacting our office. We are growing every year. We're at 1,800 agencies that 45 people in our office are over. That gets to be really difficult. We need to be able to address that change in the accounting world. We can't always get retirees like me back in the office. For some reason, they want to be greeters at Walmart. I don't know. But we need to be able to bring professionals back in. We need to be able to bring students in. We need to have a workforce that is truly the top, because we are responsible dollar-wise for the largest budget in the state. By definition, it's our office over state and local governments. We oversee the most amount of money. So it's important that we keep our professional edge and that we are incredibly prepared for the work that we do.
Awesome. All right. So for
Hey,
the last...
I haven't said this is the only race, now that we've been into this for an hour, this is the only race without a debate. And I hope I've kept...
you're kidding me.
No. And I hope I've kept everyone riveted to our accounting discussion for it. But this is incredibly important. And yet we are the only race without a debate. So push back to the Utah Debate Commission. Becky Edwards is the chair and the Republican representative on the debate commission. Devin Weiser is the chairman of the board. Push back. Ask them to sponsor a debate. Not only that, I am the auditor and I do know, $13,000 a year, at a minimum $13,000 a year has been allocated to the debate commission budget from the state legislature for the state auditor's race in these situations. They have it in there. They've received the money. They should be sponsoring the debate. I need more than me pushing back.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me at all. I just have to say.
Because you've listened to me for an hour and you know how incredibly exciting this is.
Yeah.
Important.
Well,
really important.
The thing, the way I see it is there are different ways that you get to know who you want to vote for. I mean, some of it's just conversations like this, right? This is very much like what we do as delegates as well, heading into conventions and stuff.
Right.
Just, sit down, have a conversation like this. But then, anywhere else that you show up, right? Maybe I'm just listening to somebody else ask questions at a meet and greet or something, right? But the debates are important because then I get to see you side by side and I get to go, okay,
Right.
Tina says this, her opponent says this, right? Oh, look, they overlap on these three things, but this fourth thing they really disagree on. The fifth thing, they agree on the problem, but not the solution, right? So then I can start to evaluate and go, I really like Tina's take over the other guy, right? Or I like the other guy over, right, on this thing, right? And so it's important. So
exactly. I feel like even with Republican women or with the counties, I'll debate anytime, anywhere, because I'm passionate about what we do. And I want more people to know why it's important and what we do, why it's important, and how it benefits them. We are funded with taxpayer funding. So we are responsible back to the taxpayer over what do we do and are we doing it right? And who's going to, as the manager of a team in the state auditor's office and the person responsible for the culture of the office, it is incredibly important that you are vetting the candidates, and a debate is a great way to do that.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, I have to jump off in like 2 minutes. So in 2 minutes, if somebody's going, you know what? Tina sounds great. She's the person that I want in that auditor seat. I got to help her get elected. What do they do?
So reach out, tinacannon.com. There's a little button. If you want to host a meet and greet, or if you want to have a yard sign, or even donations, reaching 535,000 primary voters across the state for a state auditor race is really difficult.
Right.
And so any way that you can be helpful, telling your friends. I've heard 20 people tell 20 people that you're supporting me, or that they should go to my website and learn more about me, or help us pay for radio ads. I probably will not get onto TV. That's way too expensive for this race. But there are so many ways to help. But reach out first. Go to tinacannon.com. Reach out. Let me know that you want to help, and we will find a way for you to help, even if it's going door to door and delivering our door hangers, putting up a yard sign. We will take any and all help.
All right. Sounds good. Well, you can see it on the screen, tinacannon.com. Thanks for coming, Tina. This was awesome.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up here, folks. Until next time, Max out.